All right, guys, let's get you guys started. So today we are going to talk about where you get the biggest burn. This is kind of confusing for people, so let me bring this up real quick so you guys can see this. Hopefully I brought up the right one. Yep. Okay. So we're going to go through where you get the biggest burn. What we're talking about is the total amount of calories that you are burning throughout the day. And that matters because if your goal is to lose weight, we need to be able to maximize how many calories you're burning. So when we look at it, that is your total daily energy expenditure. Now, there's a couple of different ways. That looks kind of funky. Couple of different ways that you can calculate this. Knowing, let me just preface this by saying, it is not going to be 100% accurate. Like even the tracker that is saying you're burning 2,500 calories is not 100% accurate. And there's also calculators that you can plug in to see where you're at, just like BMR and all those things. So if you were to go to Google and type in TDEE calculator, it would pull up a calculator where you put in your height, weight, age, gender, right? And then it'll ask you, like, from an activity standpoint, are you sedentary? Do you exercise? Whatever. And it's going to try to guesstimate how many calories you burn in a day. Here's what I want you guys to understand is that out of that total amount, there's 4 buckets that account for everything, right? So here's what those buckets are. The first is something called basal metabolic rate. Your basal metabolic rate is the number of calories your body should need. I think we might have even talked about this in one of the first calls. It's the number of calories that your body should need just for basic metabolic function, organ function, like all of the things that we take for granted that just operate automatically. Your body needs those calories, right? It needs that energy to keep everything moving. That's your basal metabolic rate. If you were to lay in bed all day, the number of calories your body should need just to lay there, to do nothing. You don't have a lot of control over it. And if you were to look, and you guys can actually, if you were to look up like total daily energy expenditure, and then there's also BMR calculators that you can look up. So type in BMR calculator and put that in, and just the basal metabolic rate, not like with exercise or anything, you're going to see that BMR is a large percentage of that total daily energy expenditure, even with exercise. So BMR is about 65% of that total daily energy expenditure. It's not really something that you can control. When you gain weight, you will burn more. When you lose weight, you will burn less. And as we have learned, your metabolism can down-regulate through dieting. And so you don't really control that other than don't diet all the time, because it will pull that BMR down, right? So that's that biggest bucket is your BMR. Now, aside from that, the next biggest bucket is called NEAT. And you guys have probably seen something about this online. NEAT just means non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's literally all movement not related to formal exercise. And so I always kind of joke, like, me talking with my hands is NEAT, me shifting in my chair, going to put a load of laundry in, right? Like that's all good. Taking a walk, right? Like that's all NEAT because it's not formal exercise. Now, here's what you need to know about NEAT. It accounts for about 12 to 15% of that total daily energy expenditure. Here's what's beautiful about NEAT. It easily impacts that total daily energy expenditure, but it does not create metabolic compensation. Meaning that me going like this or me taking a leisure walk does not threaten the metabolism. It's just like, oh, you're a human, you're moving, that's fine. It doesn't feel threatened by it. Whereas exercise, it will go, oh, that's a lot of calories you're burning, and it will start to release those hormones we've talked about, right? So when it comes to NEAT, it is one of the best ways to get your body that you can control, one of the best ways that you can get your body to burn more calories without getting any kind of metabolic kickback. Okay, so those are your first 2 buckets. Then we have something called TEF, or the thermic effect of food. We've talked a little bit about this. It accounts for about 10 to 12%. And that just means that when you're eating food that is requires more of your digestive system. It's a little bit harder to break down. That's actually a good thing because it makes your metabolism go up. And that's going to be mostly protein and fiber. Both of those are harder on the digestive system. We don't want to just pack the body full of those right away. We want to kind of ramp those up so your body gets used to it. But over time, that means that you're going to burn a higher amount just from eating certain types of food. That's the thermic effect of food. And then the last bucket, you see it at the bottom, is exercise activity thermogenesis. This is all exercise, cardio, strength training, whatever. It accounts for 5 to 6% of your total daily energy expenditure. And because you are burning a higher amount in a smaller amount of time, you will typically get some kind of metabolic compensation in the form of increased hunger and craving hormones and energy reduction, meaning that you're going to be less motivated, you're going to feel a little bit more tired. That is your metabolism's way of saying, oh, there's too big of a gap. Does that make sense? Now, I can tell you I have gone head to head with the best of them who debate this amount, and the numbers are always there. It will only account for 5 to 6% of your total daily energy expenditure over time, right? So when we're looking at how the body, even though you may burn more in that like 45 minutes of cardio, right? If we're looking at total amounts over a week, over a month, these others are going to account for a higher amount than exercise, and exercise is going to create some metabolic compensation. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't do exercise. It just means that what we want to do is get these other ones, these other factors in place first, and then start to layer in exercise so that it's not so shocking to the system. And the way that I typically recommend it is like, hey, let's work on non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Let's work on generalized movement. Let's work on walks. Let's just get you moving a little bit more. Let's focus on protein and fiber. Let's get those blocks in place first. And then we layer in exercise so it's not quite a shock to the system. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions on that before I jump forward? Look like it? Okay. So those are your big blocks inside total daily energy expenditure. So when inside the challenge, really we've focused on walking and strength training. So why are these two so important? Well, number one, leisure walking has the greatest impact on NEAT, on that non-exercise activity thermogenesis. I can tell you, when clients hit their leisure walks, they hit their goals. It's just that simple. Again, there's no compensation there. Leisure walking, not cardio walking, leisure walking is going to lower stress hormones. It's going to increase insulin sensitivity. If you missed it, we talked about this yesterday. So those cells in your body, right, can become resistant to the message of insulin to open up and use glucose for repair and all that good stuff. So over time, as we age and through different lifestyle factors, nutritional habits, things like that, those cells can become resistant. Well, walking actually helps those cells become more sensitive, meaning that when insulin gets released to pull that glucose into the cells themselves are more receptive and sensitive to that message. So they'll pull it in and they'll actually use it. And again, you can do a ton of walking and it won't create any kind of metabolic compensation because your body is just used to walking. So that's why we do the leisure walking. Now, why strength training? Well, number one, strength training preserves muscle. So I think we talked about this yesterday too, is that the body is either going to be in a catabolic state or an anabolic state, meaning it's either going to be burning or it's going to be building. The metabolism doesn't like to do both of those things at the same time. I had an old mentor say it's the equivalent of like patting your tummy and rubbing your head or whatever at the same time. The metabolism feels the same way. So it doesn't like to do both of them at the same time. And usually it requires things like anabolic steroids to help your body do that. So when you go to lose weight or lose anything, your system isn't going to always just distinguish between fat and muscle. It's just going to go, I'm burning, I'm eating, and it's going to burn through everything. So when we're doing strength training, getting adequate nutrition, then that's going to help preserve that muscle. And at the end of the day, the more muscle you have, the higher your natural metabolism is, meaning that if I have more muscle, I'm going to burn more calories just to preserve that muscle. It is more metabolically active than fat. So we want to have muscle, right? The other benefit of strength training is that if you were to take, let's say, an hour of cardio versus an hour of strength training, and you were to compare how many calories you burn in each of those hour sessions, you 100% would burn more calories doing cardio. The challenge with cardio is that it only burns while you do it, right? Like you do cardio, you burn calories. When you stop, the increase in caloric rate stops too. Versus strength training, you're not burning as many calories while you're doing it. But what happens is if you are actually doing strength training, which, let me explain, is different than holding light weights while you're moving around, that's called movement. Strength training is heavy enough that you're actually activating the muscle fibers and growing them and getting them stronger. So you need to lift heavy enough in order to do that. What that does is, because you're creating little tiny micro tears in that fiber, the fibers of your muscle, the body then goes, oh, we have to repair that. And so that repair state, and no, you don't, that doesn't mean you should always be sore, but there is a repair and a restoration state that goes into effect after lifting weights that your body knows it's trying to basically get back to normal. And that will get you to burn a higher amount for the next 24, 48 hours. Again, dependent upon the intensity exercise, how, which muscle groups that you're working. There's a lot of variance right there, but it will give you a higher amount afterwards, not just while you're doing it. So we're getting that afterburn effect. Strength training, fantastic for people who have any kind of blood sugar issue, because muscle loves insulin. It needs insulin, right? So anybody that has like a glucose issue, the first thing I'm looking at is we got to get you walking. We've got to get you on some level of strength training, because that muscle is just going to pull that insulin in and start using it, right? So that gets your blood sugar back into a more level space. Now, the caveat with strength training is to understand where leisure walking isn't going to give you any metabolic compensation. Strength training can absolutely increase hunger and craving. So you just have to be aware that, like, hey, when I have these strength training sessions, right, particularly large muscles like your legs, back, chest, your body, because it's going into that restoration, is going to go, hey, I'm burning more, I need more. So it will ask for more food. And if you're not paying attention, what will happen is you just end up snacking more. And I get it all the time. People are like, oh, I just feel like I'm really a lot more snacky right now. And I'm like, we look at their workouts and it's like they're crushing their workouts. Their body's just asking for more calories. So when we're prioritizing the type of exercise for fat loss, this comes up quite a bit too, is based on time. I get a lot of questions of like, listen, I can't just keep layering in more exercise. Like I can't do an hour walk and then 30 minutes of strength training and then some cardio, and like, right, like at some point it becomes too much. So you're trying to figure out like, hey, if I have an hour that I can set aside every day, how do I fit this in, right? So number one, leisure walking, if you have a weight loss or fat loss goal, again, because it's going to get you to burn a higher amount of calories without any kickback, I always prioritize leisure walking first. That being said, it doesn't have to be an hour every time. It could be 40 minutes, right? So let's say that you have an hour per day, 5 days a week, right? Hopefully 6. Out of that 6 hours that you've dedicated for some kind of movement, right? You could say, well, 3 days a week, I'm going to do 30 to 40 minutes of strength training. And then those days that I'm doing 30, 40 minutes of strength training, I'm going to do 20 minutes of leisure walking. That's all I got left, right? And then maybe one day I'm going to do LISS or zone 2 cardio. I'll explain that in just a second. And then the rest of it, I'm just going to fill in with leisure walking. Hopefully this makes sense. So you're going to prioritize it based on where you're getting the biggest buck. And if you notice, LISS cardio, or same as zone 2 cardio, LISS cardio is low intensity, steady state cardio, sorry. And all that means is that instead of like spiking your heart rate up and then dropping it down like with intervals, right, you're keeping it pretty steady. I think we talked about this yesterday. It's right around that like 60, 65%, 70% of max heart rate. And that's going to keep you super steady. It doesn't, generally speaking, unless you go for longer periods of time, it won't increase hunger hormones. It might a little if you go like longer than 30 minutes. Sometimes it'll start to do that. But it is going to burn a decent amount of calories, and it will also release some good feel-good hormones. So that's a benefit too. And then when it comes to short HIIT training, it's not that I'm against it. It's just that remember that in midlife, you are much more stress sensitive. And so for the average midlife woman who is already in a stress response and who probably isn't going to take 5 minutes afterwards to do what she needs to create some kind of restoration in her system, HIIT training is just going to add more fuel to the fire in terms of her being in fat storage. So for me, when I'm talking to clients, it's like, listen, we layered in, we always make sure that we're getting our leisure walking in first, and we manage nutrition. Then I layer in strength training, right? And we start, and the reason being for that is that, again, it's going to increase hunger hormones. So then I'm like, okay, let's start with like 20-minute workouts. Let's make sure you can manage those. And then we start to expand the strength training a little bit from there. It's rarely over 40 minutes. And then it's adding list cardio in zone 2. And then if all of the hormones are balanced, if their sleep is good, their hunger cravings are normalized, their energy levels are good, and they're feeling good, they're digesting okay, then once in a while I'll throw in like a HIIT workout where it's like, hey, this is a 15-minute short HIIT workout, keep it short so that it doesn't spike any kind of stress hormones, and then you can layer those in. So hopefully that makes sense. This one was short and sweet today, guys. What questions do you got? You can type them in the chat as well if you have them. Give you guys just a second. Here. Does all that make sense? So just to give you guys a heads up, so on for tomorrow, we are going to be talking about how to speak hormone. I kind of mentioned a few of them as we went through today. I'm going to teach you how to know what your body is saying to you without ever having to go through any lab work. Your hormones actually speak to you and tell you things. I'm going to teach you how to pay attention to what they are saying and what to do about it. So, all right, guys, if no questions, we are good for today. And I will see you guys. I think tomorrow's call is 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Tomorrow's Thursday, right? 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Convert that to any overseas times. You are very, very welcome. And then I will see you guys all tomorrow. Have a good night. We'll see you then.